My brother stole our grandmother's ashes. He said it was just temporary, but I knew he meant ransom. The house she left us was worth $790,000, and he thought grief could be priced the same way. I spent nights staring at the empty shelf where her porcelain urn used to sit, wondering how someone raised by the same woman could turn love into leverage. When I finally stood in court, holding her ashes against my chest, I didn't ask for money. I asked for peace, and for her name to rest in dignity again. The air in Tacoma felt heavier that morning. The sky hung low and gray like it was grieving with us. Grandma Margaret's urn sat on the small oak table in the front of the chapel, a smooth porcelain vessel with her name carved faintly into the glaze. The lavender bouquet beside it was already wilting, filling the air with a scent that was both comforting and unbearable. I hadn't been back home in almost 4 years. Seattle had become my escape, a place where I could breathe without feeling like a disappointment. But standing there, facing that urn, I realized how much of me still belonged to this house, to her voice, to the woman who raised me when no one else wanted to. Ethan stood on the other side of the room, scrolling through his phone even as the pastor spoke. He wore a dark suit that didn't quite fit, his tie loose, his face unreadable. He didn't cry. Not when they mentioned her years volunteering at the senior center. Not when they played her favorite hymn. He just kept his arms crossed, tapping his thumb against his wrist, impatient, like he was waiting for a meeting to end. When the ceremony was over, I stayed behind. Everyone else drifted outside, murmuring small talk about how lovely the service was. I moved closer to the urn and whispered, "You can rest now, Grandma. I'll make sure your memory stays safe." The house on North Juniper Street still smelled like her. Lavender soap, old books, a hint of ceramic clay from her studio in the basement. On the kitchen counter sat her silver locket, the one she wore every Sunday. Inside were 2 tiny photos, Ethan and me, taken before the resentment grew between us. That night I walked through each room in silence, tracing her world with my fingertips. The worn banister, the cracked window she never replaced, the old tea set she refused to sell. I found her reading glasses on the nightstand and set them beside the urn. Then Ethan appeared at the doorway, his voice flat. "So, what's the plan with the house?" I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the frame, arms folded. "It's worth, what, $790,000 now?" "I checked Zillow. We should sell it before the market drops." I blinked, too stunned to answer. The ashes behind me felt suddenly fragile. He smiled, small and sharp. "Don't look at me like that, Lauren. Grandma's gone. It's just property now." The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. I turned back to the urn, my hands trembling. "Not to me," I whispered. "Never to me." 2 days after the funeral, the house no longer felt sacred. It felt like a chessboard. Ethan called for a family meeting, though it was just the 2 of us and Mom sitting at the dining table where Grandma used to serve her Sunday roast. The urn rested quietly on the mantel behind me, silent, almost watching. Mom started softly, avoiding my eyes. "Your brother thinks we should sell the property before taxes become a problem." Ethan was already leaning forward, papers spread across the table. Zillow listings, handwritten notes, a calculator. "Look, Lauren, the market's hot. We could each walk away with nearly $400,000. Grandma wouldn't want this place rotting." I clenched my jaw. She wanted it lived in, not liquidated. He smirked. "Oh, please, you live in Seattle. You're not moving back here. You don't even visit unless someone dies." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked at Mom for backup, but she just sighed, her thumb tracing the edge of her teacup. "Maybe Ethan's right, honey. It's a lot to maintain alone." I turned toward the window, staring at the lavender field that bordered the backyard, pale purple waves swaying in the cold wind. That garden had been Grandma's pride. She once told me, "As long as something still grows here, I'm not gone." I faced them again. She built this home with her own hands. She made the tiles in the fireplace. Every inch of this place is her. Ethan's tone hardened. "It's also $790,000, Lauren, and that's real, not nostalgia." He pushed a stack of paperwork toward me. "If we sell now, it's clean. If you drag it out, it gets messy." I looked down at the papers, his signature already scribbled at the bottom, mine left blank beside it. I could almost feel Grandma's disapproval in the still air. "I'm not signing," I said quietly. He scoffed, gathering his papers. "Then don't act surprised when reality catches up." Mom's voice trembled. "Please, both of you. This isn't what she'd want." But Ethan was already walking out the door, muttering, "We'll see about that." The front door slammed, rattling the frame. The sound echoed through the empty halls. I stared at the urn on the mantel, its porcelain surface reflecting the last ray of daylight. The silence felt heavier than before. I didn't know it then, but that was the last night the urn would still be there. The next morning was too quiet. The kind of silence that hums in your ears until you start to wonder if something's wrong. I made coffee, hoping the familiar sound of the kettle would fill the emptiness, but even that felt distant. I turned toward the living room out of habit, expecting to see the porcelain urn on the small oak table. The sunlight hit the surface where it used to sit. Bare, clean, the urn was gone. At first I thought Mom had moved it to dust. But the lavender bouquet that always stood beside it was knocked over, its petals crushed into the wood. A thin ring of dust outlined where the urn had been, like a ghost refusing to leave. "Mom?" My voice echoed down the hallway, no answer. I walked through every room, half whispering her name, half praying this was a mistake. But when I reached the kitchen, I saw it, a folded note beside my cup. The handwriting was Ethan's. "If you want Grandma back, call me. Let's talk about the house." My stomach turned cold. I called his number immediately, voicemail. The second call, nothing. The third, he finally answered. "What did you do?" I said, my voice shaking. He sounded calm, almost casual. "Relax, she's fine. I just needed your attention." "You stole her ashes." "I borrowed them. Until we come to an agreement. You can't keep everything for yourself." My breath caught. "She's not leverage, Ethan." He laughed softly. "Oh, but she is. You made her your property long before I did." Then he hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier than the grief itself. I stood there, phone in hand, the world around me blurred. I called the police, explained everything. The officer on the other end said, "Ma'am, unless there's proof of theft or threat, this sounds like a civil dispute." A civil dispute, that's what they called it. Not desecration, not blackmail. I sat on the floor beside the empty table, the smell of cold coffee and wilted lavender thick in the air. The weight of it pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me flinch. The refrigerator's hum. The creak of the stairs, my brother's voice replaying in my head. When dawn came, I looked out the window at the lavender garden and whispered, "I'm bringing you home, Grandma, no matter what it takes." Then I grabbed my car keys and stepped into the cold gray morning. I didn't remember driving. Somehow, between anger and disbelief, I found myself behind the wheel of my Subaru, heading toward the edge of Tacoma, the road still wet from last night's rain. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The whole city looked half asleep, wrapped in fog. Every few blocks I checked my phone, hoping Ethan would text. He didn't. I wanted to believe he'd come to his senses, but a voice in the back of my head whispered that I already knew him better than that. Grandma used to say that silence reveals who people really are. Ethan's silence told me everything. I stopped by the coffee shop on Elm Street, the one Grandma used to love. The barista still remembered her order. She smiled, saying, "Your grandma always tipped with exact change." "Never a penny short." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my throat burned. I left the cup untouched on the counter. Back at the house, I started asking neighbors if they'd seen anything strange. Most shook their heads politely, the kind of suburban sympathy that ends the moment you walk away. But Mrs. Rowan, the widow across the street, hesitated. "I did see a truck last night," she said. "A silver Ford drove off around midnight." My heart kicked in my chest. Ethan drove a 2010 silver Ford Ranger. She pointed to her porch camera. "It records automatically. You can check if you want." We stood together in her living room, watching the grainy footage. At 12:43 a.m., a shadow crossed her driveway. Ethan, wearing his black hoodie, carrying the porcelain urn in both hands, my grandmother's ashes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Do you want me to send this to the police?" Mrs. Rowan asked gently. I nodded, barely hearing my own voice. "Please, and can you send a copy to this email too?" I typed it in trembling hands. When I walked back home, the sky had started to clear. Sunlight broke through the fog in thin streaks, cutting across the lavender field behind the house. I stood there, watching the petals move with the wind, and it almost felt like she was still here, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. I went inside, printed the footage, and stared at Ethan's face frozen on the screen, calm, almost proud. He didn't look like someone ashamed of what he'd done. He looked like someone who thought he'd won. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, about who would protect her memory and who would exploit it. I picked up my phone and called Olivia. I need a favor, I said. We're going to Seattle. Seattle always smelled different from Tacoma: wet pavement, espresso, and rain that never quite stopped falling. I followed the address Mrs. Rowan helped trace, a small apartment complex near Fremont. The kind of place people rent when they're running out of money or excuses. Olivia came with me. She didn't ask many questions, just sat in the passenger seat with her hand wrapped around a thermos. When we pulled up, she looked at me and said quietly, "You sure you want to do this?" I nodded. I just want her back. We climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor. My hands shook as I knocked. The sound echoed down the hall, sharp and hollow. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, then I heard his voice from inside. "Come in." He sounded calm, too calm. When I pushed open the door, the smell hit me first. Stale beer and lavender. The combination made my stomach twist. Ethan was sitting on the couch, watching a muted TV like he'd been expecting me. On the coffee table in front of him was the urn, my grandmother's urn. I froze. "You brought her here?" He shrugged. "She's fine. Better view from up here." I walked closer. "You had no right." He leaned back, eyes steady on me. "You left me no choice. You get the house, you get the legacy, and I get what? A pat on the back? I just wanted my share." "She didn't owe us anything," I said. "She left us love. You turned it into ransom." He laughed quietly. "Spare me the moral speech, Lauren. Everything's a transaction. You think you loved her more, but maybe you just played your part better." My hands curled into fists. "Give me the urn." He stood up slowly, taking it in both hands. For a moment, I thought he might actually hand it over. Then he smirked. "You signed the deed and you can have her back. Until then, she stays with me." I felt Olivia step closer behind me, tense, ready to move if I did. "Ethan," I said softly, "this isn't just property. That's her. You're holding her." He glanced down at the urn, his fingers tightening. "Then maybe you should start treating her like leverage instead of worship." Something inside me cracked. I reached forward before I could stop myself, but Olivia grabbed my arm. "Lauren, don't." Ethan smiled, satisfied. He set the urn back on the table, tapping the lid with one finger. "See, you're emotional. I'm practical. That's why you'll lose." I stared at him, at the ashes resting in that fragile porcelain, and I realized this wasn't just greed, it was punishment. When I finally walked out, my chest ached like I'd left part of myself behind. Olivia whispered, "What now?" I looked back one last time at the door. Now I prove what he did. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's hands on that urn. The way he held it, not gently, not reverently, just like another object he could trade. I sat in Grandma's old armchair, surrounded by her scent, lavender, clay, and something faintly sweet like the candles she used to burn when she worked late in her studio. The silence of the house felt heavy, but not empty. It felt like she was still there, waiting for me to remember something. My eyes drifted to the oak chest at the corner of her bedroom, the one she always kept locked. I'd opened it once when I was 10 and gotten scolded for touching her unfinished stories. I went to it now, heart beating too fast, and knelt on the rug. The lock was old. It clicked open with a twist of the tiny silver key that still hung from her dresser mirror. Inside were stacks of letters, yellowed newspaper clippings, and at the bottom, her worn brown Bible. I lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, its warmth, like it had absorbed her hands over the years. Something slipped from the pages and landed softly on the floor, a sealed envelope with my name on it. I froze. Her handwriting was unmistakable, the same looping cursive from the birthday cards she used to send. My hands trembled as I tore it open. "Lauren, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably arguing with your brother again. I never wanted my house to become a battlefield. I built it for love, not for dividing. The deed is meant to be yours, not because I love you more, but because I know you'll protect it. You understand that peace is worth more than property." My breath caught. I read the words twice, then a third time, letting them sink in. The envelope also held a folded paper, a handwritten draft of a will, dated a month before she died. It wasn't notarized, but it was clear. The house belonged to me. I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at her signature. It wasn't about ownership. It was about faith, her faith in me to do the right thing. Outside, the rain had stopped. The garden glimmered in the moonlight, silver drops clinging to the lavender stems. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel completely lost. I looked up toward the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. I'll make this right." When morning came, I printed the letter, the draft of the will, and the footage of Ethan carrying the urn. I called Attorney Reese. "It's time," I said. "I have everything we need." Attorney Daniel Reese didn't say much when I handed him the folder. He just flipped through the pages slowly. The letter, the handwritten will, the security footage, and the text Ethan had sent me. His expression shifted from calm curiosity to quiet anger. "This is enough," he said finally. "He used a deceased person's remains for financial coercion. That's extortion, Lauren." The word felt heavy in the air. Extortion. Not family dispute, not misunderstanding. A crime. We filed the report that same afternoon. The police took copies of everything. For the first time, someone looked me in the eye and said, "We'll take it from here." I didn't quite believe them yet, but it was the first time I'd felt seen. Ethan, of course, didn't stay quiet for long. He called me that night, his voice sharper than before. "You went to the cops?" "Yes," I said simply. He laughed, bitter and hoarse. "You think they'll care? They never do. You just made this worse for yourself." "For me?" I asked. "You're the one holding Grandma hostage." "Hostage?" he repeated, mocking the word. "You're so dramatic. You always have been. That's why she pitied you." It was the first time I didn't cry when he tried to hurt me. I just let the silence stretch until he hung up. The next morning, officers showed up at his apartment. They didn't arrest him, not yet, but they issued a subpoena for the urn and his phone records. He returned neither. Instead, he sent one last text. "You think Grandma loved you more. Let's see who she sides with now." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I didn't know what that meant, not yet, but the words chilled me. By evening, the story had reached the rest of the family. My mother called, frantic. "Lauren, please don't drag him into court. He made a mistake." "No," I said. "He made a choice." The house was quiet again that night, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt steady. The lavender field outside swayed in the wind like it was listening. When Daniel called the next morning, his tone was firm. "Court hearing's been approved, 3 days from now." I looked at the urn's empty spot on the shelf, at the faded circle of dust, and whispered, "We're almost there, Grandma." For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the moment I'd bring her home. The silence after justice, the peace after the storm. I didn't know how ugly it would get before that. But I knew one thing. He had stolen her ashes. I was going to reclaim her dignity. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper. The air was too cold, too still. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart beating against my ribs like it wanted out. Across from me, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored, like this was just another negotiation. The urn sat on the evidence table between us, sealed in a clear protective box. Even through the glass, I could see the faint scratches along the base where he'd handled it. I had to look away. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor felt like thunder, then silence. Attorney Reese began, calm, professional. He presented everything: the letter, the unsigned will, the text messages, the footage of Ethan carrying the urn. Each piece felt like another piece of oxygen returning to the room. Ethan's lawyer argued that it was a family misunderstanding, that there was no intent to harm. When the judge asked Ethan directly, "Did you take your grandmother's remains without your sister's consent?" he smirked. "I just wanted her attention," he said. The courtroom shifted. A few people gasped. I kept my eyes on the table, my hands still. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I stood, holding the printed photo of Grandma's lavender garden. My voice came out small at first. She taught us to grow things, to protect them, not to use them. I turned toward Ethan. "You took her ashes like they were leverage, like she was a bargaining chip in your fight for money. But she wasn't your property, she was our family." The judge nodded slowly. "I've heard enough." The verdict was short but sharp. Ethan was ordered to return the urn immediately. The judge called his actions an act of moral cruelty and mandated community service. For once, Ethan didn't speak. When the bailiff handed me the urn, I felt its weight, heavier than I remembered. Maybe because this time I knew what it had cost to get it back. I held it against my chest and whispered so softly no one could hear, "You're safe now." As we left the courtroom, the sun had broken through the clouds outside. Light spilled across the marble floor, warm and blinding. Attorney Reese said quietly, "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not really. The trial had ended, yes, but grief, forgiveness, and healing, those things don't keep court hours. Still, as I stepped into the light, I let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. And for a fleeting second, it felt like she was walking beside me. I waited 3 days before opening the urn again. It wasn't fear that stopped me. It was reverence, the quiet kind that makes you afraid of even breathing too loud. That Sunday morning, I carried her home, the real home. The lavender garden behind the house was in full bloom, waves of pale purple bending in the wind. It smelled just like it used to when she'd sit out here, humming old songs while trimming the stems. I placed the urn on the stone table she loved, beside her silver locket. For a long moment, I just stood there listening. The wind brushed against the chimes, soft and hollow. I could almost hear her laugh in the distance, the one that rose from her chest and filled every empty space around her. Ethan didn't come. He didn't call either. Mom tried to defend him once more, but I asked her to stop. Some silences are better left untouched. Olivia helped me carry the small brass scoop I'd bought earlier that morning. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. I opened the urn and felt the air shift. The ashes were pale gray, fine, delicate, like something both gone and eternal. I took a handful, trembling, and scattered them across the garden. The breeze caught them instantly, sending tiny silver clouds over the lavender, across the sunlight, into the open sky. My throat tightened. "You're home now," I whispered. "No one can take you again." For a while, I just sat there on the stone bench, hands dusted with ash and soil, watching the world breathe. Every petal moved as if the earth itself exhaled. There was no music, no words, just the soft rhythm of peace returning to where it belonged. Behind me, Olivia placed a small plaque she'd ordered, a simple rectangle of brushed steel with an engraving. "In loving memory of Margaret Vance, keeper of peace, maker of home." I smiled through the tears. "She'd love that," I said. When the sun began to dip, the light turned golden, spilling across the field like a blessing. I stood up, brushing my hands clean, and looked at the house. The windows glowed softly as if she were still inside, moving through the rooms, humming her songs. I turned to Olivia. "This place isn't a memory anymore, it's a promise." That night I slept for the first time in weeks without waking in panic. The house creaked with its usual warmth. The lavender scent lingered on my skin. And somewhere between sleep and dawn, I dreamed of her, sitting in her chair, smiling, saying only one thing. "You kept your word." A year later, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt alive again. The lavender garden stretched wider now, a sea of color that brushed against the white fence. The air smelled like her again, soft, clean, and peaceful. I'd spent months restoring the place, not to erase what happened, but to honor what survived. The plaque at the gate read the Eleanor Vance Center. People came here for quiet conversations, to sit, to think, to breathe. Some came to grieve, others to heal. I never told them what the house used to be, how it once held silence sharper than glass. They didn't need to know the pain that built the peace. Mom visits sometimes. She brings lemon cake, the kind Grandma used to bake. We sit on the porch without talking much. The silence between us has softened. Not heavy anymore, just human. Ethan hasn't come around, but I heard he started therapy as part of his sentence. I don't hate him. I don't know if I ever really could, but forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's what you give yourself when you're done carrying the weight. I've learned that grief doesn't end. It changes shape. Some days it feels like rain, gentle and familiar. Other days it's sunlight breaking through the clouds, quiet but certain. Every morning, before the visitors arrive, I walk through the garden with her silver locket in my hand. I talk to her sometimes, out loud like she's still listening. Maybe she is. Maybe peace is just the echo of love that never died. Standing by the gate today, I saw a woman leave the garden in tears. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for building this place. It feels like home." I smiled. That's exactly what it's meant to be. As the sun set, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn gold. I thought about everything we'd lost, everything we'd found, and everything we finally learned to let go of. My grandmother once told me, "Family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who protects your peace." She was right. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, finding balance, and turning pain into purpose. If you've ever carried a wound like this, the kind that lingers long after the apologies end, remember, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over punishment every single day. And if stories like this remind you that justice can still be tender, stay with us here on Heartless Revenge. Because sometimes the truest revenge is peace.